The warning lights bathed the command bridge in crimson as Admiral watched the tactical display with growing unease. The fleet had been holding the line against the invasion for 3 standard cycles, but their defenses were crumbling. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes across the void, each one representing thousands of lives lost to the relentless advance of the enemy swarm. "Admiral," communications officer called out, her voice tight with barely contained panic. "We're receiving a transmission on the emergency frequency. It's from the Terran Confederation." His 4 eyes narrowed. The humans had been admitted to the Galactic Council only recently, after demonstrating their technological capabilities in peaceful ventures. Most species viewed them as curious but ultimately unremarkable beings from a backwater system. Their ships were crude by galactic standards, their weapons primitive, their tactics unrefined. "Put them through," he ordered, wondering what assistance these newcomers could possibly offer in such dire circumstances. The holographic display shimmered, revealing a human male with graying hair and intense blue eyes. His uniform bore markings that didn't recognize, but the human carried himself with unmistakable authority. "Admiral, I am Admiral of the Terran Defense Force. We've been monitoring your situation. Our fleet is en route to assist." Felt his mandibles click together in what might have been amusement if the situation weren't so desperate. "Admiral, while we appreciate your offer, I must advise that the forces number in the thousands. Our combined fleet of 12 species has been unable to halt their advance. Perhaps it would be wiser for your ships to evacuate civilian populations instead." The human's expression didn't change. "With respect, Admiral, we didn't come here to run. They've made it clear they intend to exterminate every sentient species they encounter. That makes this our fight, too." "How many ships are you bringing?" asked, pulling up the tactical display to show the overwhelming enemy numbers. 57. The bridge fell silent. 57 ships against a swarm that had already destroyed over 300 Allied vessels. It wasn't courage the humans were displaying. It was madness. "Admiral," began carefully, "perhaps you don't fully understand the scale of—" "I understand perfectly," the human interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "We'll be dropping out of hyperspace in 30 minutes. Please ensure your ships can distinguish our IFF signatures. We don't want any friendly fire incidents." The transmission ended, leaving staring at the empty hologram projector. Around him, the bridge crew exchanged worried glances. They had fought alongside many species over the centuries, but they had never encountered such apparent disregard for tactical reality. "Sir," tactical officer spoke up hesitantly, "should we advise the other fleet commanders about the human arrival?" "Yes," replied slowly, "and tell them to prepare for whatever is about to happen." Exactly 30 minutes later, space rippled as the human fleet emerged from hyperspace, studied their ships through the long-range sensors, frowning at what he saw. The vessels were indeed crude by galactic standards, angular utilitarian designs that prioritized function over the elegant curves favored by most species. They looked more like flying weapons platforms than proper starships. "Admiral," called out, "the humans are requesting fleet coordination data. They want targeting information on enemy command structures." "Grant them access," ordered. Perhaps they intended to make surgical strikes before retreating. It was the only logical explanation for their presence here. They had noticed the new arrivals as well. Their organic ships shifted formation, a portion of their swarm breaking off to engage what they clearly saw as easy prey. Watched in fascination as nearly 200 enemy vessels moved to surround the human fleet. What happened next? Everything he thought he knew about space combat. Instead of maneuvering defensively or attempting to maintain distance, the human ships accelerated directly toward the incoming formation. No evasive maneuvers, no attempt to use their range advantage. They simply charged straight into the teeth of the enemy. "Are they malfunctioning?" asked in disbelief. The question died as the human weapons opened fire. Had expected to see the standard particle beams or plasma torpedoes used by most civilized species. Instead, the human ships unleashed something entirely different. Streams of projectiles tore through space, followed by missiles that moved faster than anything in the galactic arsenal. But it wasn't the weapons that shocked him, it was how the humans used them. Every shot was precisely aimed, not at center mass like most species preferred, but at critical systems. Engine clusters exploded as tungsten slugs punched through armor that should have been impenetrable. Command nodes dissolved under focused fire that showed an intimate understanding of anatomy and technology. "How are they targeting so accurately?" A whispered. "They have adaptive armor systems. You need to hit the same spot multiple times to penetrate." The answer became clear as watched the tactical display more closely. The human ships weren't acting independently. They were operating as a single coordinated unit, with multiple vessels focusing fire on individual targets in perfect synchronization. When one ship's weapons cycled down, another immediately took over, maintaining continuous pressure on the exact same weak points. The first wave of attackers lasted less than 4 minutes. As the organic ships dissolved into expanding clouds of vapor and debris, the human fleet reformed and continued their advance toward the main enemy concentration. They hadn't lost a single vessel, and their formation remained perfect despite the intensity of the engagement. Impossible, in breathed. They have been studying galactic tactics for centuries. They know how to counter every known fighting style. "Apparently not every style," murmured, his tactical mind racing to understand what he was witnessing. The main swarm had taken notice now. The massive bioships began moving to intercept the humans, their living weapons charging with malevolent energy. These weren't the smaller attack craft the humans had just destroyed. These were fortress-class vessels, each one the size of a space station and armed with weapons that could crack planetary surfaces. Admiral's voice crackled over the communications array. "Allied vessels were about to engage the primary enemy formation. Recommend you fall back to minimum safe distance." Admiral responded urgently, "Those are fortress-class bioships. Our combined fleet barely managed to destroy one of them, and we lost 6 vessels in the process. You can't possibly." "Thank you for the warning, Admiral. We'll handle it from here." As the human fleet approached the enemy fortress ships, something extraordinary happened. Instead of maintaining their tight formation, the human vessels scattered in what appeared to be complete chaos. Ships broke off in seemingly random directions, some diving below the orbital plane while others climbed high above it. To any traditional military mind, it looked like panic. The commanders apparently thought so too. Their massive ships moved to exploit what they saw as disorder, spreading their formation to engage the scattered human vessels individually. It was exactly what the humans had been waiting for. The attack began simultaneously from 17 different vectors. Human ships that had seemed to be fleeing in panic suddenly reversed course, their weapons systems cycling to full power. But instead of engaging the enemy ships directly, they targeted something else entirely, the space between them. Watched in amazement as the humans deployed some kind of gravitational weapon he had never seen before. Space itself seemed to twist and buckle around the fortress ships, creating artificial gravity wells that pulled the massive vessels toward each other. "They're forcing them to cluster," In realized with growing excitement. But why would they? The answer came in the form of weapons that shouldn't have existed. From the human command ship, a single projectile launched, not toward any specific target, but toward the gravitational anomaly the other ships had created. As it approached the clustered enemy vessels, the projectile split into thousands of submunitions, each one guided by its own micro-intelligence. The fortress ships, massive and heavily armored as they were, had one critical weakness that no galactic species had ever thought to exploit. Their organic nature meant they required living crew distributed throughout their structure. The human submunitions didn't try to penetrate the thick outer hulls. Instead, they burrowed through service ports, maintenance shafts, and atmospheric vents, reaching the crew compartments within. What followed could only be described as systematic extermination. The fortress ships began dying from the inside out as their crews were eliminated with surgical precision. Without living guidance, their bioweapons powered down, their navigation systems failed, and their adaptive armor became static and vulnerable. The human fleet moved in for the killing blow with mechanical efficiency that was both beautiful and terrifying to witness. In less than 20 minutes, 7 Fortress-class bioships had been reduced to drifting hulks. The humans had accomplished what the combined might of 12 galactic species had failed to do in 3 days of continuous fighting. But they weren't finished. Admiral's voice echoed across all fleet communication channels, calm and professional as ever. "Phase 1 complete. All units prepare for Phase 2. We're taking the fight to their staging area." felt his blood chill. The staging area was deep in enemy-controlled space, protected by thousands of additional ships and orbital defense platforms. It was considered impregnable by every military analyst in the galaxy. "Admiral," he transmitted, "that's a suicide mission. The staging area is defended by static defenses designed to repel conventional attacks," replied. "We're not planning a conventional attack." As the human fleet began moving toward the edge of the system, found himself following with the remnants of his own forces, along with ships from 6 other species. He told himself it was to provide support, but deep down, he knew the truth. He had to see what these impossible humans would do next. The journey to the staging area took 8 hours at maximum hyperspace velocity. During the transit, studied every piece of data they had on human military doctrine, trying to understand the tactical philosophy behind what he had witnessed. What he found was deeply disturbing. Humans, it seemed, had spent their entire evolutionary history fighting each other. There was a catalog of conflicts spanning, each one more destructive than the last. They had developed not just weapons, but entire sciences dedicated to the art of killing efficiently. Psychological warfare, asymmetric tactics, total war doctrine, concepts that most galactic species found abhorrent, humans had refined into precise instruments. More troubling still was their approach to technology. While other species developed tools for exploration, communication, or artistic expression, humans had a singular talent for turning any innovation into a weapon. Their medical could be as assassins. Their terraforming equipment doubled as planet crackers. Their entertainment media was indistinguishable from training simulations for mass combat. They were a species that had never known peace, and it showed in everything they created. When the combined fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the staging system, was prepared for almost anything. The sensor readings that greeted them were staggering. Over 4,000 enemy vessels arranged in multiple defensive shells around a massive construction facility that was clearly building more ships at an alarming rate. "Allied commanders," Admiral's voice carried an odd note of satisfaction, "you're about to witness something that has never been attempted in galactic warfare. We call it deep strike saturation bombing." "What exactly does that mean?" Admiral Thrace of the Republic asked nervously. "It means we're going to hit them with everything we've got, from directions they can't possibly defend against, using weapons they've never seen before." The human fleet spread out across the edge of the system, their ships taking positions that seemed random until realized they were creating a perfect sphere around the enemy staging area. Each human vessel was exactly the same distance from the target zone, positioned so that their attack vectors would converge simultaneously. "All units," announced, "commence quantum torpedo deployment." Space around each human ship shimmered as they launched what appeared to be small, unremarkable projectiles. But as watched the sensor readings, he realized these weren't conventional torpedoes at all. They were moving through some kind of folded space, taking paths that the normal rules of physics. "Sir," In called out urgently, "those projectiles are appearing and disappearing from our sensors. It's like they're moving in and out of normal space." "Quantum phase technology," breathed. "They're moving through dimensional barriers. The sensors can't track them because they're not in our reality half the time." Hundreds of quantum torpedoes materialized simultaneously inside the defensive perimeter, bypassing shields, armor, and point defense systems entirely. But instead of exploding immediately, they began transmitting data back to the human fleet, detailed scans of every enemy ship, station, and defensive platform. The humans had just performed the most comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation in military history, and they had no idea they were under observation. Admiral's next order sent chills down spine. "All ships initiate Protocol 7, target package Alpha through Zeta, time on target 60 seconds. The human fleet opened fire with weapons that existed outside conventional understanding. Not particle beams or plasma torpedoes, but something that seemed to bend reality itself. Streams of energy that moved faster than light, penetrated any known armor, and struck their targets with the force of collapsing stars. But it was the coordination that truly amazed. Over 50 human ships, spread across hundreds of thousands of kilometers, fired thousands of individual shots with such precision that every projectile arrived at its target within microseconds of each other. The result was a symphony of destruction that unfolded with mathematical perfection. Entire sections of the fleet simply ceased to exist, their matter converted to energy by weapons that operated on principles no galactic scientist had ever theorized. Defense platforms that had stood for decades crumbled like sand sculptures hit by ocean waves. The massive construction facility, protected by shields that could deflect asteroid impacts, collapsed into itself as its structural integrity was selectively dismantled at the molecular level. In 60 seconds, humanity had accomplished what every military strategist agreed was impossible: the complete elimination of an entrenched enemy position without suffering a single casualty. As the final explosions faded and the debris began to drift apart, Admiral's voice carried across the communications array one last time. Staging area neutralized. Threat assessment. Naval capacity reduced by approximately 97%. Recommend immediate diplomatic contact to discuss surrender terms. Stared at the tactical display, his mind struggling to process what he had witnessed. In less than 24 hours, humanity had single-handedly ended a war that had been consuming the galaxy for months. They had demonstrated technological superiority that made every other species obsolete, tactical brilliance that redefined the art of warfare, and a casual efficiency in dealing death that was both inspiring and absolutely terrifying. For the first time in his long military career, Admiral understood why some species in the galaxy had voted against humanity's admission to the Galactic Council. It wasn't because they were primitive or unworthy. It was because they were dangerous beyond measure, and now everyone knew it. 3 months after the defeat, Admiral found himself aboard the human command vessel Indomitable, participating in what the Terran Defense Force called a tactical briefing. The meeting room was austere by galactic standards. No decorative elements, no comfort amenities, just functional furniture and wall-mounted displays showing strategic data. Admiral sat across from him, along with representatives from 8 other species who had witnessed the human military demonstration. The atmosphere was tense, though not hostile. Everyone present understood that the balance of galactic power had shifted permanently. The Galactic Council has requested a formal assessment of human military capabilities, announced Ambassador, the diplomat who served as the Council's military liaison. Given recent events, there are concerns about integration of human forces into existing defense structures. His expression remained neutral. What specific concerns? Ambassador activated a holographic display showing casualty reports from the campaign. In 72 hours of combat, coalition forces suffered over 40,000 casualties. Human forces suffered 0 casualties while eliminating an enemy that had been considered unbeatable. This level of disparity raises questions about whether human military doctrine is compatible with galactic warfare principles. Watch the human admiral carefully. Over the past months, he had learned to read subtle changes in human expression, skills that were becoming essential for anyone dealing with these newcomers. Slight eye movement suggested he found the question amusing rather than concerning. Ambassador, replied, our military doctrine is based on a simple principle. When forced to fight, we fight to win completely and as quickly as possible. Prolonged conflicts waste resources and increase casualties on all sides. But your methods, interjected General Eth of the Defense League, they seem designed for total annihilation rather than conventional warfare. The weapons you deployed against the staging area didn't just destroy ships, they unmade them at the molecular level. They were a species-ending threat, responded matter-of-factly. They had made it clear through their actions that no negotiation was possible, no peaceful coexistence could be achieved. When faced with such an enemy, half measures are both immoral and tactically unsound. Leaned forward. During his time studying human history, he had discovered something that still disturbed him deeply. Admiral, I've been reviewing your species' historical conflicts. In your Second World War, your people developed weapons capable of destroying entire cities. You actually used them. We did, confirmed without hesitation. The alternative was a prolonged ground invasion that would have cost millions more lives on both sides. Sometimes the most humane option appears to be the most brutal. The room fell silent. Most galactic species had developed weapons of mass destruction during their technological evolution, but the idea of actually using them against populated areas was nearly unthinkable. Warfare, even at its most intense, was generally conducted according to certain unspoken rules that preserved civilian populations and cultural centers. But surely, Ambassador said carefully, human military philosophy has evolved since those primitive times. Activated his own holographic display, showing a three-dimensional map of human space. Our military philosophy has become more sophisticated, but the core principles remain unchanged. We study every potential threat until we understand it completely. Then we develop multiple methods of neutralizing that threat with maximum efficiency and minimum risk to ourselves. The display shifted to show detailed files on every major galactic species, including those present in the room. Felt his stomach sink as he realized the implications. "You've been analyzing us," he stated. "We analyze everyone," replied simply. "It's not malicious, it's prudent. The military, for example, relies heavily on networked command structures and coordinated fleet movements. Your greatest strength is also your greatest vulnerability. Disrupt the command network at key nodes, and your entire fleet becomes confused and ineffective." The human admiral gestured, and the display showed a tactical simulation. Watched in growing horror as virtual human forces systematically dismantled a fleet by targeting exactly the weaknesses it identified. "The Defense League," continued, turning to General Eth, "favors heavily armored ships with overlapping defensive fields. Impressive against conventional weapons, but vulnerable to phase variance attacks that can shift energy patterns to match your defensive frequencies." Another simulation played out, showing battleships rendered helpless as their shields were systematically neutralized by weapons that adapted in real time to their defensive measures. "This is what we mean by study," explained. "We don't just analyze your current capabilities, we project future developments, identify potential weaknesses, and develop countermeasures for scenarios that may never occur. It's simply good preparation." General Eth's fur was standing on end, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. "You're planning to fight all of us." "We're planning to be capable of fighting all of you if necessary," corrected. "There's a significant difference. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. It's served our species well over the..." Ambassador was studying the displays with obvious unease. "Admiral, these tactical analyses suggest that humanity could defeat any single galactic power, possibly several in combination. Given that level of military superiority, why haven't you demanded greater political representation in the Council? Why haven't you used this advantage to secure better territories or trade agreements?" For the first time during the briefing, smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Because conquest isn't our objective, Ambassador. We learned long ago that ruling unwilling populations is more trouble than it's worth. We prefer trading partners to slaves, allies to subjects." "But if not conquest," asked, "then what is your species' ultimate goal?" Shut down the tactical displays and leaned back in his chair. "Survival, Admiral, pure and simple survival. Humanity spent most of its history fighting over limited resources on a single planet. We nearly drove ourselves extinct multiple times before we learned to look beyond our own world. Now we've found a galaxy full of other intelligent species, and we've discovered that the universe is not a safe place." The human admiral activated a new display showing threat assessments for various galactic regions. "Though we're just one of 17 species we've identified as potential existential threats. There are others out there, some we've encountered, some we've only heard rumors about. Ancient machine intelligences in the galactic core, parasitic entities that consume entire civilizations, nomadic fleets that strip star systems bare of resources." Studied the threat matrix with growing concern. Some of the entries described dangers he had never heard of, while others referenced legends that most species dismissed as myth. "Our goal," continued, "is to ensure that humanity survives whatever challenges the universe presents. That means being prepared for threats that haven't emerged yet, developing capabilities that seem excessive for current needs, and yes, analyzing potential future conflicts with species we currently call allies." "Because alliances can change," Ambassador said quietly. "Because circumstances can change," corrected. "We don't expect our current allies to become enemies, but we recognize that political situations can shift rapidly. The species that's your friend today might be under different leadership tomorrow, or they might face extinction and become desperate enough to attack former allies for resources, or they might be replaced entirely by something that looks like them but isn't." The last comment sent chills through the assembled representatives. Several galactic conflicts had begun exactly that way, shape-shifting infiltrators or parasitic entities that replaced legitimate governments without detection. So you prepare for every possibility, concluded. We prepare for the ones we can anticipate, replied. And we build flexible capabilities that can adapt to threats we haven't thought of yet. General Eth activated his personal communicator, speaking in rapid to someone off-channel. When he finished, he looked troubled. Admiral, my government has asked me to inquire about human expansion plans. Your species has been establishing colonies at an unprecedented rate since joining the Council. Nodded, 18 new systems in the past year, with 12 more scheduled for settlement in the next 6 months. Is there a concern about territorial disputes? Not exactly, Eth replied carefully. But the systems you're choosing seem strategically selected. All of them are positioned to control major hyperspace lanes or resource nodes. Of course they are, confirmed without embarrassment. Why would we choose strategically irrelevant locations? Every colony represents a significant investment of resources and population. It would be irresponsible not to select sites that provide maximum long-term value. Ambassador was studying a star chart that had appeared on his personal display. Admiral, if I'm reading this correctly, your proposed colonial network would give humanity effective control over 70% of galactic trade routes. 73% actually, corrected. But control is the wrong word. Influence would be more accurate. We have no intention of restricting legitimate trade or charging excessive transit fees. We simply want to ensure that critical supply lines remain secure and accessible. The implications were staggering. If humanity continued its expansion at the current rate, they would soon be in a position to strangle the galactic economy with minimal effort. Not through military force, but through simple geographic advantage. And if a species doesn't consider your fees reasonable, asked. Smile returned. Then they're welcome to find alternative routes. The galaxy is a large place, Admiral. There are always other options for those willing to look for them. The unspoken message was clear. Alternative routes that would be longer, more dangerous, and ultimately more expensive than simply accepting human terms. I think, Ambassador said slowly, the Council needs to understand exactly what humanity's long-term vision for galactic civilization looks like. That's a reasonable request, agreed. In simple terms, we envision a stable, prosperous galaxy where all species can develop according to their natural inclinations, trade freely with one another, and cooperate against external threats. We see ourselves as providing the security framework that makes such a civilization possible. By security framework, you mean military dominance, General Eth observed. We mean the ability to respond effectively to any threat, whether it comes from within the galaxy or beyond it, replied. Military dominance is simply one component of that capability. Was beginning to understand the true scope of human ambition. It wasn't conquest in the traditional sense. It was something far more sophisticated and ultimately more effective. They intended to become indispensable to galactic civilization, positioning themselves as the ultimate guarantors of peace and stability. And if a species rejects this vision, he asked. Then they reject it, said with apparent indifference. We're not interested in forcing our ideas on anyone, but we will defend ourselves and our allies against any aggression, and we will continue expanding our capabilities regardless of outside approval. The meeting continued for another hour, but attention was focused on analyzing what he had learned. Humanity wasn't seeking to rule the galaxy in any conventional sense. They were methodically positioning themselves to become its central nervous system, controlling trade, providing security, and maintaining the technological edge necessary to deal with any threat. It was a strategy that was both brilliant and terrifying. Traditional conquest required constant military pressure to maintain control over unwilling populations. Human hegemony would be based on willing dependence. Other species would choose to accept human leadership because the alternatives would be demonstrably worse. When the briefing finally ended, lingered as the other representatives departed. Admiral seemed unsurprised when he remained behind. You have additional questions, Admiral? Just one, replied. How long have you been planning this? The strategic positioning, the technological development, the careful analysis of every other species, This level of coordination suggests decades of preparation. Consider the question carefully before answering. Humanity began developing contingency plans for galactic contact over 2 centuries ago, long before we achieved faster-than-light travel. We knew that eventually we would encounter other intelligent species, and we wanted to be prepared for any scenario. 2 centuries, repeated. You were planning galactic strategy before you even left your home system. We were planning survival strategy, corrected. The galaxy just happened to be where that planning led us. As made his way back to his own ship, he found himself thinking about the deeper implications of what he had learned. Humanity had entered galactic civilization not as newcomers seeking acceptance, but as predators evaluating a new hunting ground. They had studied every species, identified every weakness, and positioned themselves to exploit every advantage. The most disturbing part was that they genuinely seemed to believe their own rhetoric about peace and stability. They weren't driven by malice or greed, but by an absolute conviction that their way was the only way to ensure long-term survival in a dangerous universe. Perhaps they were right. They had certainly demonstrated that existential threats to galactic civilization were real and immediate. If humanity was capable of dealing with such dangers more effectively than traditional galactic powers, then maybe their dominance was inevitable. But couldn't shake the feeling that the galaxy was about to discover why some species chose extinction, rather than surrender their independence. The humans were coming, and resistance might not just be futile, it might be impossible. 2 years after the campaign, Admiral stood in the observation deck of the Galactic Council's primary station, watching the largest military exercise in recorded history unfold before him. 53 species had contributed ships to Operation Unity, ostensibly a joint training mission designed to test interspecies cooperation protocols. In reality, it was the galaxy's attempt to understand how to fight alongside, or if necessary, against, humanity. The human contribution to the exercise was modest by their standards, 12 ships, including Admiral's flagship. They were vastly outnumbered by the combined fleets of the other participants, which should have made the exercise a relatively straightforward demonstration of traditional galactic military doctrine. It was not going according to plan. Simulation parameters confirmed, announced the exercise coordinator, a naval officer whose 4 arms moved constantly between different control interfaces. Scenario 7, defense of the station against numerically superior aggressors. Human forces will play the role of attackers. All other participants will coordinate defensive operations. Activated his personal tactical display, watching as the defensive fleet took up textbook formations around the massive space station. Over 800 ships from dozens of species, their positioning perfect according to every military manual written in the past millennium. The human ships were barely visible on the tactical display, 12 tiny icons moving at the edge of sensor range, apparently conducting some kind of reconnaissance sweep. All defensive units be advised that human forces have begun their approach, the coordinator announced. Estimated time to engagement, 47 minutes. That was the last accurate prediction made during the entire exercise. 18 minutes into the supposed approach phase, alarms began sounding throughout the defensive fleet. Watched in amazement as ships began reporting simultaneous system failures across their entire formation. Communication arrays malfunctioned, sensor networks crashed, and navigation computers started displaying impossible readings. "What's happening?" demanded Admiral Thrace, commanding the contingent. "Unknown," came the response from the exercise coordinator. "We're showing massive electromagnetic interference across all frequencies, but the source is unclear." Its enhanced sensors were more sophisticated than standard fleet equipment. As he analyzed the data streaming across his displays, a pattern began to emerge. The interference wasn't random. It was precisely targeted at the communication protocols used by each species' military networks. The humans had somehow deployed widespread jamming systems without anyone detecting the deployment. "All units switch to backup communications," Admiral Thrace ordered. The switch lasted exactly 43 seconds before the backup systems began experiencing the same interference. "Emergency protocols," Admiral Thrace commanded, his voice tight with frustration. "Laser communication arrays only." As the defensive fleet struggled to re-establish coordination, the human ships finally appeared on long-range sensors. But instead of approaching as a unified group, they had scattered across the entire engagement area, their positions suggesting no coherent tactical plan. "Sir," the coordinator reported with obvious confusion, "human vessels appear to be lost. They're not following any recognizable attack pattern." Admiral Thrace activated the fleet-wide laser communication network. "All defensive units maintain formation. The enemy appears to be in disarray. Prepare to engage when they enter optimal range." That was when the first defensive ship exploded. The heavy cruiser Magnificent dissolved into expanding plasma without warning, its debris field expanding rapidly through the defensive formation. No weapons fire had been detected, no incoming projectiles identified. The ship had simply ceased to exist. "Report," Admiral Thrace demanded. "Unknown cause of destruction," came the panicked response from the Magnificent sister ship. "No energy signatures detected, no impact indicators, the ship just broke apart." A second ship exploded, then a third. Each destruction was instantaneous and apparently causeless, leaving the defensive fleet increasingly paranoid and confused. Sensors had detected something the fleet's standard equipment had missed. Microscopic objects moving at significant percentages of light speed, too small and fast to register on conventional scanners. The humans were using some kind of relativistic projectile weapon that rendered traditional defensive measures useless. "All ships evasive maneuvers," Admiral Thrace ordered. "Random patterns, maximum acceleration." The order proved counterproductive. As ships began breaking formation to avoid the invisible attacks, they lost the overlapping defensive fields that had been their only real protection. The rate of destruction increased dramatically. Within 12 minutes, over 200 defensive vessels had been eliminated by an enemy force that remained completely beyond their ability to engage or even locate effectively. "Exercise terminated," the coordinator announced. "All units return to designated positions for debriefing." The aftermath was sobering. In the debriefing room, Admiral Thrace confronted Admiral with barely controlled anger. "That wasn't a military exercise," he accused. "That was a demonstration of advanced warfare techniques that no other species possesses. You used weapons and tactics that violate the agreed-upon parameters of the simulation." His response was mild. "Admiral, the exercise parameters that each force should employ their standard tactical doctrines. We did exactly that. Standard doctrines don't include weapons that can't be detected or defended against." "Standard human doctrines do," replied calmly. "We've been quite transparent about our military philosophy. We develop capabilities that ensure victory regardless of enemy capabilities or numerical advantage." Ambassador leaned forward, his expression troubled. "Admiral, the implications of what we just witnessed are staggering. If human forces can neutralize galactic fleets with such ease, what prevents you from simply taking whatever you want through military force?" "The same thing that prevents any species from taking whatever they want," answered. "Practical considerations. Conquering territory is easy compared to governing it effectively. Destroyed populations can't contribute to economic growth. Fear-based rule requires constant military pressure that's expensive and inefficient." General Eth activated his personal display, showing casualty projections from the exercise. "According to these models, humanity could defeat the combined fleets of the entire Galactic Council within 72 hours. "Probably less," agreed without hesitation. "But again, that's not our objective. We want trading partners, not smoking craters." Had been studying human behavior long enough to recognize when they were being completely honest. Admiral genuinely believed every word he was saying, which somehow made the situation more unsettling rather than less. "Admiral," he said carefully, "what happens if a species decides they can't accept human hegemony? What if they choose to fight rather than submit?" His expression grew thoughtful. "Then they fight, and we defend ourselves. But I would hope that rational beings would consider the likely outcomes before making such a decision." "And if they're not rational?" Ambassador asked. "Then they're a threat to galactic stability, and we deal with threats appropriately." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity had positioned itself as the arbiter of rationality in galactic affairs. Species that accepted human leadership would be considered rational and worthy of protection. Those that resisted would be classified as threats and eliminated. It was a perfect logical trap that made resistance both futile and immoral according to human definitions. Over the following months, watched as the new galactic order took shape. Human colonies continued expanding at an unprecedented rate, but now they were being invited to establish security stations in systems belonging to other species. Trade agreements increasingly favored human interests, but the alternatives were clearly worse for everyone involved. Most tellingly, military procurement began shifting toward human designs. Not because other species were being forced to adopt human technology, but because human weapons were demonstrably superior to anything else available. Species that wanted to remain militarily relevant had no choice but to buy human equipment and train according to human doctrines. The transformation wasn't violent or obviously oppressive. It was simply inevitable. Its own government had signed a comprehensive defense agreement with humanity 6 months after Operation Unity. The terms were generous. Human forces would defend territory against any aggression, in exchange for basing rights and preferential trade status. What the agreement didn't mention was that military doctrine was now entirely dependent on human tactical support. Their fleet commanders trained at human military academies. Their strategic planning was conducted using human analytical frameworks. Their weapons systems required human technical support to remain operational. Independence had been surrendered so gradually and voluntarily that most still believed they were a sovereign species. The genius of the human approach was that it made resistance literally unthinkable. Any species that attempted to challenge human dominance would find themselves isolated and facing economic collapse as trade networks shifted to avoid conflict zones. Worse, such resistance would be genuinely harmful to galactic civilization. Human protection had allowed unprecedented prosperity and stability. Scientific advancement had accelerated as resources were freed from military competition. Exploration of dangerous regions became possible under human military escort. The invasion had been the last time any major threat had emerged from outside the galaxy. 3 separate incursions had been detected and eliminated by human early warning systems before they could establish a foothold in civilized space. Humanity had become exactly what they claimed to be, the indispensable guardians of galactic peace and prosperity. But had begun to understand the true cost of that protection. He stood again in his observation deck, watching human patrol ships conduct routine security sweeps through space. The crews of those ships were professionals, polite, and efficient in all their dealings. They genuinely seemed to care about the welfare of the species they protected. Yet their very presence was a constant reminder that independence was ultimately an illusion. If humanity ever decided that behavior was becoming problematic, those same professional crews would eliminate the threat with the same efficient courtesy they brought to every other task. The most disturbing aspect was that found himself grateful for human protection. The galaxy was genuinely safer under their guardianship. Trade was more prosperous, exploration more successful, and scientific advancement more rapid than ever before in recorded history. Resistance would harm his own people more than it would damage human interests. As he watched the patrol ships complete their sweep and jump to hyperspace, finally understood why some species chose extinction rather than surrender. Not because death was preferable to human rule, but because the alternative to death wasn't really rule at all. It was obsolescence. Humanity had solved the ancient problem of galactic warfare by making warfare itself obsolete. They had achieved total victory not through conquest, but by becoming indispensable to their enemies' survival. The galaxy feared humans not because they were cruel or oppressive, but because they were perfect predators who had learned that the most effective way to hunt was to convince the prey that being eaten was in their own best interest. And the most terrifying part was that they were probably right. Turned away from the observation port and returned to his duties, filing his daily security report in the format prescribed by human military protocols. The report would be reviewed by human analysts, processed through human strategic planning systems, and filed in human data archives. His signature on the document was just another small surrender in a war that had ended before he even realized it had begun. In the distance, human ships continued their eternal patrol, protecting a galaxy that no longer remembered what it meant to be truly free.